we have got a very important session. So we now bifurcate again into Hall A and Hall B. The Hall B will be taken care by Vipin and Dr. Arvind. And for now, in the current Hall A, may I request Dr. A.N. Rai sir, Dr. Usha Didwania ma'am, Dr. Poonam Lal ma'am, Dr. P.C. Sinha, Dr. Sandeep Kumar, Dr. Jyoti Karn, and Dr. Chandrabhanu. They are the chairpersons for this session. This is a very important session for cardiac disorders and pregnancy. So if chairpersons are on board, I will request them to take over and start the session. Dr. Usha Didwania.
Yes, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
So, should I start?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Yeah. So, good evening, everyone who have joined here. I'm very much thankful to the organizing team of Cardicon 2021 for giving me this opportunity to moderate a very important session, heart disease in very important topic. The first topic is pregnancy-induced hypertension. Approximately 6 to 10% of pregnancies are affected with pregnancy-induced hypertension. And out of these, 10 to 20% of patients progress to pre-eclamptic toxemia and eclampsia. And this condition adversely affects and the fetus if not properly managed. So toxemia of pregnancy is one of the major causes of maternal morbidity and mortality. To throw light for this topic, we have a learned speaker today, Dr. Shamshad Alam. So without wasting time, I would invite Dr. Shamshad Alam to speak on this topic. Now, over to you, Dr. Alam.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. It's an honor for me to present on this topic in front of such a qualified faculty and obviously my teachers, my seniors as well. Today, we will be discussing about pregnancy-induced hypertension. Actually, this is the most important complication associated with hypertension for which a medicine reference or a cardiology reference is being given. So we need to go through this. I think my slides are quite visible to everyone. Yeah, first of all, we should know about the incidence, the hypertensive disorders in pregnancy. They usually affect 5 to 10% of pregnancies worldwide, and they remain a major cause of maternal, fetal, neonatal mortality as well as morbidity. The risk associated with hypertensive disorders in pregnancy, they usually lead to placental abruption, which leads to high bleeding and anemia in a lady in the gestational time of 20 to 34 weeks. It has a important impact on the incidence of stroke, multi-organ failure, resulting into preeclampsia and eclampsia, and finally leading to HELLP syndrome, as well as finally culminating into disseminated intravascular coagulation, which usually succeeds after developing sepsis. The fetus is at high risk of intrauterine growth retardation. Usually 25% of cases of preeclampsia have intrauterine IUGR, 27% of patients of preeclampsia, they have premature babies, and 4% experience intrauterine death of the baby. Now, first of all, we should define and classify hypertension in pregnancy, because hypertension in pregnancy is not merely simply a hypertension what we deal in adults. It has to be classified whether it is present before pregnancy, but whether it has developed during pregnancy, whether it has any pre-existing hypertension. So it has been classified into 5 types. First of all, defining hypertension, any systolic blood pressure of more than 140 mmHg and a diastolic blood pressure of more than 20 mmHg is known as hypertension, and it has been further reclassified into mild and severe. BP in the range of 140/60 by 90/110 is considered as mild, and for severe, more than 160/110 blood pressure is required. And this is contrast to the conventional grading of hypertension, which grades hypertension into mild, moderate, and severe. In pregnancy, only we have two categories: whether it is mild, for which oral therapy is needed; whether it is severe, for which we intend to give IV therapy and hospitalize the patient. Pregnancy and hypertension, it has been classified into 5 types. First of all, pre-existing hypertension. Usually, it is a normal hypertensive patient who develops pregnancy. In between, the special care of hypertension has to be taken during pregnancy. Second, that is we are discussing now, it is pregnancy-induced hypertension, that is gestational hypertension. Usually, it should develop after 20 weeks of gestation, and the history of patient should be there that she is not having hypertension prior to this episode of pregnancy. Usually, this type of hypertension, it resolves within 6 weeks postpartum. Now, third is pre-existing hypertension along with superimposed gestational hypertension with proteinuria. Usually, these patients are hypertensive prior to pregnancy, then they become normotensive in the range of 0 to 20 weeks. But after again 20 weeks, they become hypertensive. That is superimposition of gestational hypertension over their pre-existing hypertensive history. Now, the fourth one is preeclampsia. Any hypertension associated with significant proteinuria is termed as preeclampsia. Usually, it occurs in first pregnancy, or if the patient is having multiple pregnancies, or in case of hyperhidrotic form mole, or in the case of antiphospholipid antibody syndrome. It has also occurred in those patients who have pre-existing renal disease, diabetes, hypertension, and frequently it is associated with fetal growth restriction, that is 27% incidence of fetal prematurity. The only cure for preeclampsia, if it is not controlled, is delivery. After delivery, usually preeclampsia resolves, and consequently hypertension also resolves. Proteinuria, it may be late manifestation of preeclampsia, and it should be suspected whenever de novo hypertension is accompanied by headache, bowel disturbance, abdominal pain, and abnormal laboratory tests. Now, the fifth one is antenatally unclassified hypertension. This term has been used when BP first recorded after 20 weeks of gestation, and it is unclear with the history of the patient whether patient was hypertensive earlier or not. So reassessment after 6 weeks postpartum will give an important clue whether patient had pre-existing hypertension or patient developed only gestational hypertension, because usually gestational hypertension resolves after 6 weeks postpartum. Now, coming to the basics of BP measurement in pregnancy, BP measurement in pregnancy, it is different from what we do in our clinics currently. It should be measured in the sitting position or left lateral recumbent position if the patient is in labor. Appropriate size arm cuff has to be used at the heart level, and Korotko 5 sound has to be used for a diastolic blood pressure measurement. Manual auscultation, it is the gold standard for BP measurement, because in case of pregnant patient, automated devices, they tend to under-record blood pressure. So they are unreliable for severe preeclampsia. Usually we under-record the blood pressure of these patients. Now, the validated devices should be used, so preferably a mercury manometer has to be used. Now, ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, as it has been approved for better monitoring of blood pressure, it is superior to office blood pressure measurement, and it is also superior to home-based blood pressure measurement. Usually ABPM, it avoids unnecessary treatment of white coat hypertension too. Suppose if the patient due to anxiety has presented to your clinic with white coat hypertension. So high risk pregnant patient can be easily monitored and managed if we go for ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. Now, how should we investigate our patient for hypertension? If she is a pregnant patient, usually the basic laboratory test should be done for all patients, and it should include urine examination for proteinuria, blood count, hematocrit, liver enzymes, serum creatinine, and as well as serum uric acid, because elevated levels of serum uric acid, it usually is present before preeclampsia. So it is an important marker to predict whether patient is going to have preeclampsia or not. Hyperuricemia in hypertensive patient, it identifies patient with increased risk of adverse effect. all pregnant patients, they should be assessed for proteinuria in early pregnancy to detect pre-existing renal disease. A dipstick test for proteinuria can be used for prompt evaluation of ACR. Now, in addition to these basic laboratory tests, some special tests should be performed in our patient if it is available to us. Usually, if we are dealing a patient in a tier, in a remote cities or a low, smaller town, usually those investigations which we now discuss, they are quite enough. But if we are having a patient in Patna or any proper town, then we should go for USG investigation of kidney, adrenals, plasma, or urinary fractionated metanephrine assay to rule out pheochromocytoma. A Doppler ultrasound of uterine arteries has to be performed after 20 weeks. It has to be performed to detect those who are at higher risk of gestational hypertension, preeclampsia, and intrauterine growth retardation. Usually, Doppler ultrasound of uterine arteries, the turbulence in the uterine arteries has to be monitored to rule out any adverse effect on the fetal growth. And finally, if possible, a soluble FMS like tyrosine kinase 1:placental placental growth factor ratio, if it is less than 38, it can be used to exclude the development of preeclampsia in next coming week if it is suspected clinically. Now the point comes how we can prevent hypertension and preeclampsia. So we have to reclassify our patients whether they are at high risk of preeclampsia or they are at moderate risk of preeclampsia. And we have to exclude those patients who are at mild risk of preeclampsia. Usually those patients who are at high and moderate risk, they have to be given aspirin in the dose range of 100 to 150 milligram daily from week 12 to week 36 to decrease the incidence of fetal growth, fetal prematurity, as well as complication to the mother. The high-risk patient of preeclampsia, they include those who had an history of hypertensive disease in previous pregnancy, who are a known patient of chronic kidney disease, those who have autoimmune diseases such as most commonly like SLE or antiphospholipid syndrome, who are diabetic, and those who are chronic hypertensive patient. Now, those patients who come under moderate risk are those with first pregnancy, those who are pregnant after the age of 40 years, those who have pregnancy interval of more than 10 years, those who are obese with a morbid obesity of a BMI more than 35, who have a family history of preeclampsia, and those who are having multiple pregnancies. Now, coming to the management of these patients, how do we manage hypertension in pregnancy? So when it comes to management of hypertension, we should stick to the guidelines. And before going through the guidelines, the clinical acumen is quite necessary. The available data, safety data, and available long-term data is only available with methyl dopa, and it is available from last 40 years. And further studies with other drugs, they are not that much adequate. So any patient who has gestational hypertension and pre-existing hypertension with superimposed gestational hypertension, or with hypertension and subclinical organ damage, those who have initial blood pressure of more than 140/90, they should be treated for hypertension, and it is a class 1 indication as per the ESC guidelines. And any patient without any symptom, without any signs of preeclampsia, with a blood pressure more than 150/95, they should be treated, unlike the adults who need treatment after a blood pressure of 140. Now, what are the choice of drugs which do we have in our basket? Usually, we have a quite limited number of drugs available in our basket, which can be used in pregnant patient, which has been decided after their side effects on the female pregnant patient as well as the fetus. Most commonly used drugs available to us are methyl dopa, which has been used for last 40 to 50 years. Then comes labetalol, which is beta blocker, and calcium channel blockers. And they have been categorized as class 1 drugs. Now, coming to the use of methyl dopa is the most commonly used drug, but it has an incidence of development of postpartum depression. Second, coming to labetalol, better we should avoid the use of beta blockers because the risk of developing fetal bradycardia. But when it is emergency and if the rate is quite good, and if we have availability of CTG at the clinic, then we can easily use labetalol with monitoring of fetal heart rate. Now, finally, calcium channel should not be used. ACE inhibitor, ARBs, or any direct renin inhibitors such as aliskiren, they are not recommended during pregnancy, and they should not be used. Now, coming to management of, this was the management of mild hypertension. Now, coming to the management of severe hypertension, any pregnant patient who has a blood pressure of more than 170 by 110, she should be admitted in the emergency, and urgent IV treatment of her hypertension should be started, along with infusion of IV magnesium sulfate to prevent the development of eclampsia in this patient. For treatment of severe hypertension, the available drug options are IV labetalol, oral methyl dopa, or oral nifedipine. I recommend. Now, if a patient is having hypertensive crisis and incidence of end organ damage such as pulmonary edema, then what we can use? Yes, we can easily use nitroglycerin.
Yes, sir. Is Shamshad audible? Shamshad?
नेट इश्यू है सर.
ठीक है. मैडम क्या? Madam, I think we can go to the next speaker if we are not here.
Good evening, one and all present here.
Yes, ma'am.
At the outset, I would like to thank organizer for giving me this opportunity, and it's my proud privilege to be part of this important conference. I would like to thank Dr. Samsad for his excellent presentation. I would like to add something. Nowadays, extensive study has been done on labetalol, and it has been found that labetalol is as safe as methyl dopa, and it is more effective than methyl dopa. So nowadays, labetalol is the first line of treatment, and nifedipine is the second line. Of course, ACE inhibitor and ARB is not used because it is category D. I have found one patient who developed aneurysm at 28 weeks. So thank you again for excellent presentation, Dr. Samsad. And we all know the pregnancy is a procoagulant state. And prosthetic valves, they are thrombogenic. And anticoagulation always remains a challenge for us. It adversely affects the maternal and fetal outcome. Today we have a very learned speaker, Dr. Ram Sagar Roy from Patna, who is going to enlighten us on pregnancy with prosthetic valve. Over to you, sir. Floor is yours.
Yeah. Hello. Yes, very good evening to the respected seniors on this morning. I am going to.
सर इनको बोलिए अपना वीडियो म्यूट कर दें, नेट बहुत स्लो है उनका.
To discuss some about the pregnancy and a prosthetic valve. First of all,
make it full screen. Is it full screen?
क्या? हाँ, full screen है यार.
Is it full screen?
Yes, sir, it's a full screen.
Okay, go ahead.
Hello. Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead now.
Pregnancy and prosthetic heart valve. As we know, the prosthetic valve are very important for the particularly the patient who has very much significant indication for valvular disease, where the valve is needed, like severe MR, severe AR, or any other disease. Although the prosthetic valve is essential for them, but in few cases the prosthetic valve bring more morbidity than health sometimes. These are the few valves which we use nowadays. These are the first one is the Star Edward valve, which was the first that was a ball and cage and ball, but now bigger size and not used nowadays. Other one is the Bijog Sally tilting disc, and D shows the St. Jude region biliberator valves, which much commonly used and in whole over the world. But TTK Chitraka valve is also very much used in India. So these are the mechanical valves, metallic prosthetic, which are available for the use in cardiothoracic surgery. Now the incidence of prosthesis, and we know the pregnancy is a very thrombogenic state, and the incidence of prosthetic valve thrombosis is very high, and thromboembolic event is also very much high with this use of these valves. So the event is higher with metallic prosthetic valve than bioprosthetic valves. Higher for prosthetic valve implanted in the mitral position versus the aortic position, and higher for right-sided prosthetic valve than left-sided prosthetic valve. So, and annual rate of prosthetic valve thrombosis with metallic prosthetic valves ranges from 0.1 to up to 6%, with higher rates observed with the specific valve types in the early perioperative period with metallic heart valves implanted in the mitral and tricuspid position. The bigger the valve, the chances of metallic prosthetic valve thrombosis is higher, and in association with subtherapeutic anticoagulation. So these are the factors which promote the higher incidence of prosthetic valve thrombosis. And the incidence of heart prosthetic valve thrombosis and thromboembolic events after transcatheter aortic valve replacement is uncertain, is still not very much seen. There were no cases of prosthetic valve thrombosis in the partner and core valve trials. The risk of the thromboembolic event and prosthetic valve thrombosis after TAVR is highest in the first 3 months after valve replacement. These are the pathophysiology of prosthetic valve thrombosis in any cases, but in pregnancy, these are the surface factors due to the incomplete prosthesis, poor endothelialization, more leaflet damage during implantation, leaflet deterioration, stent fracture. The stented valves causes more valve thrombosis than the non-stented valves, and prosthetic malpositioning. Other is the hemodynamic factors like low cardiac output, prosthesis malposition, anatomical prosthesis position, prosthetic hemodynamic profile, and hyperviscosity. And the third one factor of this VHO tri is the hemostatic factor, that is hypercoagulous state. The pregnancy comes under this. Pregnancy is a hypercoagulous state where the fibrinogen and different coagulation factors are on higher side, and so there are higher chances of mitral chances of thrombosis, valve thrombosis in pregnancies. These are the examples. The most common we use the 2D echocardiography for assessment of prosthetic valve. So this is one example shown here, the mitral valve thrombosis with the color Dopplers. This is the other typical example of a prosthetic valve thrombosis showing the large obstructive prosthetic thrombosis. In spite of normal movement of the bilateral leaflet, there is a obstruction in the flow and unilateral transprosthetic flow. So these are the peculiar atypical features. 2 atypical photos and albums. This is the photo of 3D transesophageal echocardiography showing the large thrombus marking completing the medial leaflets. So, and after operating this, these are the color atlas showing the mitral valve prosthesis with large thrombus, and their counterparts show the 3D echo of that thrombosed valves. Now the clinical presentation. What are the clinical presentation of this mitral valve thrombosis? The patient with prosthetic valve dysfunction with or without thrombosis may present with progressive dyspnea and sign of heart failure or systemic embolization. Prosthetic valve dysfunction should be suspected in patient with symptom of acute or subacute onset with increase in the transprosthetic gradient compared with last echocardiography follow-up. All the arterial thromboembolic events after surgical or transcatheter heart valve replacement should be considered in prosthetic related until proven otherwise. It may be also arise from left-sided aortic or mitral valve thrombus, bacterial leaflet vegetations, or from left arterial thrombus, particularly in patient with atrial fibrillation. Then in pregnancy, particularly, we have to choose the bioprosthetic valve because bioprosthetic valve pregnancy yet to come. We have to choose bioprosthetic valve. Then take home message regarding the mechanical valve thrombosis. The obstructive valve thrombosis should be suspected present with recent dyspnea, embolic event, or inadequate anticoagulation. The analysis of the risk and benefit of analysis should be adapted to patient characteristic and local resources. Urgent or emergency valve replacement is recommended for obstructive thrombosis in critically ill patient without serious comorbidities. Choice of prosthesis, the mechanical valve offer excellent hemodynamic performance and long-term durability, but the need for anticoagulation increases fetal and maternal mortality and morbidity. Bioprosthetic valve also offer good hemodynamic performance and are much less thermodynamic. They are used in young women, however, deterioration occurring in 50% of women less than 30 years of age at 10 years post-implantation. In 10 years, almost 50% of the bioprosthetic valve get degenerated. So greater in the mitral position and then in the aortic and tricuspid position. Then by the help of the better anticoagulation, we can halt the thrombus generation and embolic events. So anticoagulation regimen during pregnancy in patient with mechanical valve. The pregnancy is associated with increased maternal risk, and all anticoagulation regimens carry an increased risk of miscarriages and hemorrhagic complications, including retroplacental bleeding leading to premature birth and fetal death. So need for anticoagulation raises a specific concern because of increased risk of valve thrombosis or hemorrhagic complication and of offspring complications. So in first trimester, the anticoagulation of all oral anticoagulants throughout pregnancy should be considered after patient information and consent when the warfarin dose is 5 mg per day. If the dose of the warfarin is less than 5 mg per day, then only oral anticoagulant can be continued for whole of the pregnancy. Or the warfarin 5 mg per day or the counterpart like the phenoprocommon less than 3 mg per day or a cinocomerol 2 mg per day. So if the dose is like that, then the one oral anticoagulant can be continued throughout the pregnancy. Because the risk of embryopathy is low with this drug, this dose of the drugs. While oral anticoagulants are in large series the most effective regimen to prevent valve thrombosis. It is a class 2A, level of evidence 3. And whatever the anticoagulation regimen, a weekly control is mandatory. So every week should be assessed about the PT and INR. Discontinuation of the oral anticoagulants between weeks 6 to 12 and replacement by adjusted dose unfractionated heparin, APTT more than 2 the control. In high-risk patients, apply as intravenous infusion or low molecular heparin twice daily with the dose adjusted according to weight and targeted anti-TNF factors level 4 to 6 hours post-dose. 0.8 to 1.2 unit per ml should be considered in patient with warfarin dose required more than 5 mg per day or phenocomerol more than 3 mg per day or a cinocomerol more than 2 mg per day. So if the dose is more than 5 mg per day only, then we have to switch to either heparin or low molecular heparin. It is also classified as a level of 2, class 2A, level of evidence with C. And discontinuation of OSC between 6 to 12 weeks and replacement by UFH or LMWH under strict dose control may be considered on an individual basis in patient with warfarin dose requirement required for therapeutic anticoagulation less than 5 mg per day or 3 mg phenocomerol or cinocomerol less than 2 mg per day. It is level of evidence B and level of evidence C. So that means there is no need of a strict control. Now, about the anticoagulation regimen during pregnancy in patients with mechanical valve, OSC are recommended during the second and third trimester until the 36 weeks. It is a class 1 recommendation. Planned vaginal delivery is usually preferred with prior switch to heparin. So, mode of delivery ideally should be vaginal with switch on heparin. Planned cesarean section may be considered as an alternative, especially in patients with high risk of valve thrombosis, in order to keep the time without oral anticoagulants as short as possible. Oral anticoagulants should be discontinued and dose adjusted unfractionated heparin or adjusted low dose molecular heparin twice daily, started at 36 weeks of gestation. It is also a class 1 recommendation. LMWS should be replaced by IV unfractionated heparin at 36 hours before planned surgery. Unfractionated heparin should be continued until 4 to 6 hours before planned delivery and restarted 4 to 6 hours after delivery if there are no bleeding complications. So it's heparin should be stopped 4 to 6 hours before and 4 to 6 hours after the delivery. It should be started after the delivery. So if delivery starts while on oral anticoagulants, cesarean delivery is indicated. These are the management of the some highlight about the management of left side obstructive prostatic thrombosis is assessed on the TT and fluoroscopy. If there is obstructive thrombus, patient is critically ill, then directly go for the surgically. If not, surgery is not available, then we can thrombolize it. Again, the left sided the same. If patient is not critically ill, then we can thrombolize. The prostatic valve thrombosis medical therapy. The fibrinolytic therapy is enabled for patient with thrombosed left-sided prostatic heart valve, descent onset, descent class 1 and class 2 NIH class 1 or 2 symptom and a small thrombus. If the fibrinolytic therapy is enabled for thrombosed right-sided prostatic valve. Emergency surgery recommended for patient with thrombosed left-sided prostatic heart valve with NIH class 3 and class 4. That means if patient is critically ill in class 3 and 4, then directly go for surgery. In left-sided, emergency surgery is advised in right-sided valve if the thrombus is large. That means more than 8 centimeters square. So at last, this is the summary slide showing tells that mechanical valves patient if become pregnant, then stop warfarin during embryogenesis, that is the period 6 to 12 weeks, and keep on heparin, unfractionated heparin. Start warfarin after 12 weeks, stop warfarin at 36 weeks, start unfractionated heparin 36 weeks till completion of delivery. And the APTD ideally between 55 to 70 seconds by 6 hours after injection. Weight adjusted subcutaneous LMWH twice a day throughout the whole pregnancy. And UFH and LMWH is not effective as warfarin. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ram Sagar, for a very lucid presentation. You have indeed simplified the topic.
Proceed ahead with the next speaker.
Yes, ma'am.
Is Dr. Alok Kumar there?
Yes, ma'am, I'm there.
So now we can proceed with Dr. Alok Kumar's talk on valvular heart disease with pregnancy. So please.
Yes, Alok, you can go ahead.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. I will discuss the valvular heart disease in pregnancy. It is the most important part of pregnancy because many patients of heart disease get decompensated in pregnancy because of the hemodynamic situation in the pregnancy. So seeing this, the WHO has classified valvular heart disease into 4 categories, which are the most serious form of cardiac diseases which get decompensated in pregnancy. The most severe ones are that is WHO class 4, that is severe mitral stenosis, severe AF, pulmonary arterial hypertension, severe LV dysfunction, that is ejection fraction less than 30%, and postpartum cardiomyopathy in which the LV function is less than 50%. There is uncorrected coarctation of aorta and Marfan syndrome and bicuspid aortic valve with dilated ascending aorta. Now coming to the valvular heart disease, RSD is the most common in the developing countries. Around 56 to 89% of all cardiovascular disease comprised of RSD. And commonest is rheumatic followed by congenital. The ratio has fallen in the developing countries from 10:1 to 3:1 and even 1:1 in developed countries, comparing the rheumatic and the RSD, congenital heart disease. Stenosis comprises more than 80%. Now, what are the factors which cause cardiac failure in pregnancy? Normal heart has a good reserve. A damaged heart with a good reserve can withstand pregnancy, but a damaged heart with a poor reserve doesn't withstand the pregnancy and develop heart failure. Factors are the advanced age, arrhythmias, LVH, previous history of heart failure, and risk factors in pregnancy like anemia, infection, hypertension, excessive weight gain, or multiple pregnancies. These are all factors which further potentiate the failure in case of pregnancy. Now coming to the hemodynamic changes in pregnancy, there is an increase in cardiac output, stroke volume, heart rate, and intravascular valve volume. The systolic vascularization decreases, the systolic BP is almost the same, and there is decrease in diastolic BP. The CVP is unchanged and the oxygen consumption increases around 30%. The labor is divided into different stages. There is an increase in output in the expulsive phase around 40%, and the immediate postpartum, there is 75 to 80% increase in the cardiac output. And the heart rate and CVP increases in every stages of labor. Now coming to the postpartum, within 1 hour to 48 hours, there is increase in cardiac output, and the cardiac output comes to normal level of around after 3 months to 6 months after pregnancy. And this is same with the stroke volume, and the heart rate normalizes within 2 weeks after delivery. Pregnancy is also a prothrombotic state. It increases the risk of thrombosis in the case of valvular heart disease. Now, summarizing the changes in pregnancy, there is increased preload, reduced afterload, increased heart rate, systolic volume, and the cardiac output in a hypercoagulable circulation. Now, coming to the valvular heart disease, 80% of patients in the developing world have valvular heart disease in pregnancy. They may present for the first time in pregnancy, and the stenotic lesions have the limit the ability to increase that output, so they are not well tolerated in pregnancy. While the regenerate lesions are better tolerated, especially if the underlying cardiac function is normal. Occasionally, in regenerate lesions also there is failure when the LV function decreases. Now it's coming to the mitral stenosis. It is poorly tolerated in pregnancy, and it is the leading cause of mortality in pregnancy. This is the pathophysiology of pregnancy. The decrease of MS, the decrease in metabolic area increases the pulmonary venous pressure, which leads to pulmonary venous congestion and pulmonary edema. In pregnancy, there is increase in heart rate, and there is increase in stroke volume and cardiac output, which further deteriorates, increases the LA pressure and causes pulmonary venous congestion, and the symptoms of pulmonary edema are exaggerated. So tachycardia and increased pulmonary blood flow is the main cause of worsening. Significant MS can also have some form of LA abnormality causing atrial fibrillation, and which increases the risk of thrombosis. Now coming to the medical management. General management is the control of heart rate and limit the volume expansion. Heart rate can be controlled with beta blockers, and which also prolongs the diastolic filling time and decreases the symptoms of pulmonary venous congestion. And it also controls atrial fibrillation, atrial flutter, and also by decreasing the volume by giving diuretic. The mode of delivery is mostly vaginal in the form of mild, moderate, or severe MS with NYHA class 1 or 2, and the patients who don't have pulmonary hypertension can be given chance for vaginal delivery. Only patients with MS with NYHA class 3 and 4 and who have pulmonary hypertension which is refractory to medical management must go for LSCS. Now, what are the intervention? Intervention is the patients with severe mitral stenosis must undergo balloon mitral valvotomy. Suppose there must be preconceptual evaluation. If before pregnancy they are diagnosed as severe MS, the BMD must be done. If after pregnancy they are found to have severe MS, then the BMD must be performed before 20 weeks of gestation. And in case of moderate MS, the patient must be followed up. If there is worsening of symptoms, they can go for later BMD. If the BMD is not available, then earlier procedure like CMV and OMV can also be done. Open heart surgery is generally avoided because it causes much of the fetal distress, leading to complications of fetal death and low birth weight and preterm delivery. So these are the CMV and the OMV, which is now not used so much. Now the Burgundner's BMV is the most important procedure. If the valve is pliable and doesn't have any calcification or significant MR, then we must go for a BMV. Dilation of the MS has a dramatic improvement it increases the valve area of almost double and decreases the gradient to 33 to 50% of the initial value, and the pulmonary artery pressure decreases slowly and slowly after valvuloplasty. MR is the most common complication, which is only mild and moderate, and it is more easily taken up in pregnancy than the MR. Here from the meta-analysis, we show that area and the gradient also that decrease after PMV. The stillbirth preterm rate also decreased. There are reports of mitral valve replacement in second stage of pregnancy. This was and bioprosthetic valve stenosis case report was then a transcutaneous valve in valve prosthetic valve was placed after the stenosis of the prosthetic mitral valve. Balloon inflation causes transient maternal hypotension and decrease in fetal heart rate, which increases after a few seconds. The patient has to lie in the recumbent position, so the procedure must be done fast, and the single balloon technique is better than the double balloon technique because it takes less time. Now coming to the aortic stenosis. Aortic stenosis, the mild and the moderate aortic stenosis is well tolerated in pregnancy, and only the severe aortic stenosis, which are symptomatic or who have a poor exercise tolerance and must be subjected to exercise tolerance test if there is decrease in BP or the ECG shows the LVH or ST depression, and there is a decrease in the cardiac output after exercise. The pregnancy must not be carried out, and only the patients with mild and moderate AS and the severe AS patients who are asymptomatic or who have a good exercise tolerance test must be subjected to pregnancy. This is the pathophysiology. This is the natural history. Patients are generally of old age, so we don't see many patients of aortic stenosis in pregnancy because of the time at which the aortic stenosis becomes severe is around 60 years. Now coming to the management, balloon aortic valvotomy has been seen as a palliative procedure because in adults the balloon aortic valvotomy is not so good. So it can be used as a palliative procedure. It can be done before 20 weeks of gestation. There is one report of also a TAVI has been done in a case of pregnant patient who had pregnancy with severe aortic stenosis, and they underwent did a TAVI in a 22 weeks of pregnancy, and which was successful both for the mother and also the fetus. Now coming to the pulmonary valve stenosis, it is a common condition in pregnancy. It is a less common condition in pregnancy, and if the patient is symptomatic or has suprasystemic RV pressure, balloon pulmonary valvotomy can be considered in the patients of pulmonary valve stenosis. MR, the patients of MR and AR are well tolerated in pregnancy. So in some patients who have decreased LV function and develop pulmonary edema, the emergency surgical procedure like MVR or aortic valve replacement can be done in these patients. But the need of surgery in AR or MR is very less, and the main lesions which disturb us in pregnancy is the mitral stenosis and the aortic stenosis. There is some risk of fetal risk of radiation in the cardiac cath lab, so it can be decreased by the use of shield from the abdomen, that is the diaphragm level to the pubic symphysis. And due to this radiation, most of the procedures are done during the 16 weeks of pregnancy. And because in the 16 weeks of pregnancy, the fetus is quite low lying, it is away from the chest. So by guiding the fetus with the lead apron, the exposure to the fetus can be decreased. There is some risk of contrast media also causing fetal hypothyroidism, which generally it occurs after 25 weeks of gestation when the thyroid of the fetus becomes active. But before 25 weeks of gestation, then generally this is not a risk, and the amount of dye used generally doesn't cause this type of complication. So the best period of performing a percutaneous balloon procedure is the 4th month when the organogenesis is terminated, thyroid end of the fetus is still inactive, and the volume of the uterus is so small that there is great distance between the fetus and the heart. This is summarizing all the, this is the table summarizing all the management options in a patient of severe valve disease. Thanks. Thanks everybody. Any questions then can be taken up.
Thanks, Dr. Alok, for your brilliant presentation. And now I am looking forward interesting discussions, and I would like to request our respected chairperson to ask any question or give their expert opinion. Over to you, chairperson, sirs.
If there is no question.
No question. Hello, if there is no question, so all the 3 papers were very informative and very nice, very nice. So to conclude all the papers, first paper on pregnancy-induced hypertension, the early diagnosis for hypertension is the important factor. Starting from family history, maternal history, personal history, uterine artery Doppler, mean arterial pressure and difference of blood pressure from baseline, and maternal PAPA, placental growth factors, all these things as a screening in the first trimester and early second trimester, and 95% of cases of early onset of pre-eclamptic toxemia can be diagnosed. Of course, there are 8 to 10% false positive, and low dose aspirin, then antenatal steroid for lung maturation, and control of hypertension, Maxwell prophylaxis, early delivery, all are key factor for successful outcome. The second prosthetic valve, everything was mentioned in this talk. Then substantial benefits can be achieved with optimum calculated dose and meticulous follow-up to avoid complications of antithrombotic treatment, because we are facing the complication of disease valve on one side, and when we start antithrombotic treatment, the complication of antithrombotic treatment is there. Then the third talk was this on valvular heart disease. This is common, and many a times patient directly comes with valvular heart disease in pregnancy. At first antenatal checkup, she is diagnosed. So if a patient knows about her condition, pre-conception counseling is very important. If not, if she comes directly in the during pregnancy, then meticulous antenatal checkup, intranatal management, postpartum management, all are equally important. Maternal mortality is high in unbooked cases, and we should always take help with the cardiologist. And our aim in early cases of valvular disease, the pregnancy outcome of pregnancy and delivery is satisfactory, we can say. And the question is how to minimize the burden of without any degradation in cardiac condition. So we have to take care of with a cardiologist and obstetrician together managing the case. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity again, and wonderful session on cardiac diseases in pregnancies there.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Very much.
Chairperson.